Yakutsk region, Siberia, November 1891. The first snow had already claimed 2 homesteads that season. Smoke rose weakly from chimneys that could not fight the cold. Inside most izbas, families huddled close to failing fires, feeding them pine day and night, yet still watching their breath turn white near the walls. Winter had arrived early, and everyone knew worse was coming. At the eastern edge of the valley, something strange was happening. In a small cabin still under construction, warmth would soon defy everything the region believed about fire and survival. The man behind it was Ivan Petrov, a 23-year-old trapper's son with no training in building and no reputation for practical sense. The builders of the region made it clear they thought his idea was foolish. Some said dangerous, others said deadly. They stopped laughing on January 9th, 1892. But in November, no one believed he would last winter. Ivan made his announcement on a cold Saturday in late October, standing inside Kuznetsov's trading post with mud still clinging to his boots. He had just purchased 8 tons of river sandstone, twice what any cabin foundation required. When Kuznetsov asked what in the world he needed all that stone for, Ivan answered calmly that he was building a heat battery. The post went silent. Then someone laughed. Ivan knew that laugh well. He had heard it his whole life. He was the youngest of 5 sons, the quiet one who spent winters reading engineering journals his mother ordered from St. Petersburg instead of learning the rough skills every Siberian man was expected to master. His father had died the previous spring, leaving Ivan a modest inheritance and a name already stamped with the word dreamer. Dmitry Volkov, the most experienced builder in the region, set down his tea and studied Ivan like a man watching a boy walk toward thin ice. Volkov had built 17 cabins in the valley and survived more winters than Ivan had lived years. Ivan explained his plan in simple terms. He would build the fireplace at the very center of the cabin. Around it, he would construct a thick core of stone that would store heat and release it slowly, long after the fire burned out. Volkov shook his head. Fireplaces go on exterior walls. That is how smoke vents, right? Put it in the center and you will fill your cabin with smoke. All that stone will steal your heat instead of warming you. Ivan unfolded a rough diagram for his coat. He spoke quietly but firmly, explaining angle flue, thick stone walls, and controlled fire. Volkov barely looked at the paper. He said the stone would waste space and wood. He said Ivan would freeze before Christmas. Others joined in. Sergei Ivanov, whose family had built solid izbas for generations, said center fireplaces were for palaces, not working men. Someone asked how much would Ivan expected to burn. Ivan answered honestly, 1/2 quart a week, maybe less. Laughter filled the post. Volkov burned nearly 3 times that, and his izba was considered warm by regional standards. Volkov told Ivan kindly that books did not keep men alive when the January wind came screaming down from the Arctic. Ivan paid for stone anyway. He had 8 weeks before the true cold arrived. 8 weeks to prove that something important had been misunderstood for generations. Construction began in early November. Ivan dug his foundation deeper than any builder would have advised. At the center of the cabin, he raised a massive stone core that looked more like a tower than a fireplace. The firebox itself was ordinary in size, but was wrapped in thick sandstone on every side. More than 4,000 pounds of stone surrounded that fire. Neighbors stopped by often, some curious, some mocking. His own brother, Alexei, warned him the chimney would never draft. The flue system twisted through the stone instead of running straight upward, forcing heat to travel long paths before escaping. To most men, it looked like a maze designed to fail. By late November, the stone core stood tall, wrapped by log walls. The sleeping loft curled around the upper stone, close enough to feel its warmth. Ivan built his first real fire in early December. Kuznetsov visited that day. The temperature outside was already below minus 30 degrees Celsius. Inside the cabin, the warmth surprised him. The fire was small, yet the stone felt hot to the touch. Ivan explained that the stone had been absorbing heat for hours. That stored warmth would radiate all night. Kuznetsov did not understand the numbers Ivan spoke, but he understood warm stone when he felt it. Outside, the wind rose. Inside, the cabin held steady heat. The real cold arrived sooner than expected. By December 20th, The region sat under Arctic air. Fires burned constantly, yet Izba stayed cold. Wood piles shrank fast. At Kuznetsov's post, men complained and worried. Volkov predicted Ivan would soon beg for help. What no one knew was that Ivan had barely lit his fire in days. The stone, once heated, was holding warmth with quiet strength. He burned a few logs each evening and woke to a cabin still warm enough to live comfortably. Ivan said nothing. He knew the true test had not yet come. There was a difference between cold and deadly cold, and Siberia always delivered both. The wind told him it was coming. The cold deepened after Christmas. It did not creep in gently. It arrived like an invading army. Snow hardened into sharp grains. Trees cracked at night like gunshots. The kind of cold that killed cattle standing upright, and split green would clean in two. On December 28th, word began to spread through the valley. Ivan Petrov's cabin was warm. Not just livable, but warm in a way no other Izba was. Men whispered it inside Kuznetsov's post, careful not to sound foolish. Some said Ivan was lying. Others said he must be burning coal or hiding extra firewood. Dmitry Volkov refused to visit. He sent his teenage son instead, carrying a message filled with pride and warning. Father says you are lucky it has been mild so far. He says, the real coal will show you what stone does to a man. Ivan thanked the boy and returned to splitting wood in his shirt sleeves while frost coated the ground. His fire from the night before had burned out hours earlier. The cabin still held heat. On December 31st, the temperature dropped again. By dawn, it was near minus 40 degrees Celsius. 3 days later, the region would face the coldest air in more than a decade. January 9th, 1892, arrived wrapped in silence. The wind howled through the frozen valley like something alive. Ivan woke before dawn in darkness. The cabin felt different, not cold, but pressured, as if the world outside was pushing hard against the walls. He struck a match and lit his lamp. The thermometer confirmed what his body already knew. Outside, the temperature had dropped to minus 35 degrees Celsius, the lowest mark anyone could remember. Inside the cabin, it was 18 degrees Celsius. His fire had burned for 8 hours. A mile west, Dmitry Volkov woke twice during the night to feed his fire. Even so, his Izba sat at minus 2 degrees Celsius by morning. Ice had formed inside his water bucket. His breath hung thick in the lamplight. He had burned more than 40 logs in a single day, and his woodshed was already shrinking in a way that frightened him. Across the region, families slept in coats. Children cried from cold. Men stared at their wood piles and did the math they did not want to face. Ivan built a small fire that morning. 6 logs arranged carefully. Within half an hour, his cabin rose to 23 degrees Celsius. The stone core absorbed the heat quietly, steadily, banking it for the long frozen day ahead. When Ivan walked into Kuznetsov's post later that morning, conversation stopped. Frost clung to men's beards. Faces looked tired, drawn thin by fear and lack of sleep. Ivan looked rested, warm. Kuznetsov asked carefully how his situation was. Comfortable, Ivan said. Someone asked how much wood he had burned overnight. 13 logs, Ivan answered. 6 more this morning. I will burn another small fire tonight. The room went still. Volkov stepped forward, his face pale with cold and disbelief. That is impossible, he said. It was minus 35 degrees Celsius. My Izba was 18 degrees Celsius at dawn, Ivan replied. 21 degrees Celsius now. Accusations followed. Faulty thermometers. Exaggeration. Tricks. Ivan did not argue. He invited them to come see for themselves. By mid-afternoon, 7 men stood inside Ivan Petrov's cabin. The fire had been out for 3 hours. Outside, the temperature sat at minus 34 degrees Celsius. Inside, the thermometer read 20 degrees Celsius. Volkov placed his hand on the stone core and pulled it back quickly. The stone was still hot, not burning, but powerful, steady, alive with stored heat. They checked the far walls. 19 degrees Celsius. No cold corners, no frozen edges. Just even warmth filling the space. How long will it hold? Volkov asked, his voice changed. Until midnight without another fire, Ivan said. with a small fire at sunset. It will stay above 15 degrees Celsius until morning. No one laughed. The cold did not break the next day or the next. It stayed for 11 brutal days. Each morning, Ivan recorded numbers. Outside temperature, inside temperature would burned. He did not speak loudly about them, but the records spoke on their own. While other izbas dropped into -1 degree Celsius overnight, Ivan stayed above 15 degrees Celsius. While other men burned through it at frightening speed, Ivan used less than half. Visitors came daily, some humbled, some angry, some quietly grateful to stand in warmth for a few minutes. Dmitry Volkov returned more than once. Each time he measured, touched, and checked. On the 5th visit, he stood in silence for a long time with his hand resting on the stone. "I was wrong," he said finally, "completely wrong." By the time the cold began to loosen its grip, the region understood something had changed. This was not luck. This was not a trick. This was something new, and it worked. The silly idea had survived the coldest test Siberia could offer. The cold finally broke on January 19th. When it did, the valley felt changed, as if the land itself had learned something new. For 11 days, the Arctic air had pressed down on every izba, testing wood, stone, and belief. And one cabin had answered differently than all the rest. Ivan Petrov's records told the story better than words ever could. The average outside temperature during the cold snap had been -28 degrees Celsius. The average temperature inside his cabin at dawn after 8 to 10 hours without a fire had been 17 degrees Celsius. His was stayed steady and low, while others burned through piles meant to last until spring. Dmitry Volkov swallowed his pride and came back again, this time not as a skeptic, but as a student. He brought a notebook. He measured the stone, the firebox, the flue paths. He asked questions he had never asked in 40 years of building. He didn't just pile up stone, Volkov said quietly. You controlled it. Ivan nodded. Mass alone is nothing without direction. Word spread beyond the valley. Homesteaders rode in from miles away just to stand in the warmth and feel the stone with their own hands. Some stayed silent, absorbing what they felt. Others asked Ivan to explain again and again in plain language. Stone held heat. Fire burned cleaner. Heat moved slower and stayed where it was needed. By late January, 3 families had begun modifying their own izbas. They could not rebuild from the foundation up, but they added stone where they could. Thicker walls behind fireboxes, longer flue paths. Even those small changes reduced wood use and softened the harsh swings between burning hot and freezing cold. Sergei Ivanov brought his son to study the system closely. Together, they measured temperatures across the cabin. The difference between the warmest and coldest spots was only a few degrees. In Volkov's izba, the difference was more than 10 degrees Celsius. This heat does not rush, Ivanov said. It stays. Volkov began planning a new izba for his eldest son, who was to marry in the spring. The design placed a stone core at the center, just like Ivan's. Volkov asked for the measurements. Ivan gave them freely. I spent 40 years doing it the hard way, Volkov said. No shame in learning the easier way now. By February, variations of Ivan's design were appearing across the region. Kuznetsov started stocking sandstone specifically for thermal construction. He ordered copies of foreign papers Ivan had read and made them available to anyone who asked. The laughter that once filled his post was gone, replaced by quiet discussion and careful thought. Then came an unexpected visit. Members of the Evenki people who had lived in the region long, before any izba was raised, came to see the stone fire. An elder spoke through his grandson. He said their winter lodges had once used similar ideas. Heated stone, careful sheltering, holding warmth instead of chasing it. You remembered something old, the elder said. Ivan visited their winter camp and returned with new understanding. Knowledge flowed both ways, shaped by experience and physics alike. By spring thaw, the region was different. Wood piles were larger than usual. Fewer families faced shortages. The winter had still been brutal, but it had not broken them the way past winters had. Ivan never claimed to be a builder. He remained a trapper, rising early, working land and fur lines. But his cabin became proof that tradition could be questioned without being disrespected. In the years that followed, the idea spread across Siberia into the far north and even to remote Alaskan outposts. Mining camps adopted similar systems. Frontier manuals mentioned thermal mass and radiant heat. Government surveys recorded reduced fuel use. The change was quiet, practical, and lasting. Ivan lived the rest of his life in that same cabin. The stone core never stopped doing its work. Winter after winter, it absorbed fire and released warmth with patience and reliability. When Ivan died decades later, the cabin was still warm. The lesson left behind was not just about heat. It was about humility, about knowing that experience without understanding can become a cage. The men who laughed at Ivan were not foolish. They survived long winters using methods that worked, but they never asked why those methods worked or whether they could work better. Ivan did. His silly idea was not magic. It was physics respected instead of ignored. Stone held heat. Geometry guided it. And careful thinking outperformed habit. The wind still howls down from the Arctic every winter. The cold still tests every structure it touches. And in the frozen valleys of Siberia, Stone still remembers what a young trapper's son proved long ago. Sometimes the difference between freezing and comfort is not strength or tradition or pride. Sometimes it is the courage to build something everyone else says will never work.